So it is right around noon on Monday, July 4th, and I'm sitting here with my third cup of coffee, just finishing up the morning. The kitchen is clean. I washed all the breakfast dishes. Everything in the house is quite clean, neat, and organized because I spent much of the day yesterday vacuuming most of the rooms in the house very thoroughly, behind couches, under rugs, doing behind bookshelves and things like that, moving everything around. So now I'm just chilling and preparing for the next phase of the day, which is to start making stuff for 4th of July lunch/dinner, which would be grilled hot dogs out on this grill right here, potato salad, corn on the cob, etc., etc. But in the meantime, while I finish my coffee, I am pondering the meaning of the American Revolution, which is why we celebrate this holiday. The Declaration of Independence was actually signed on July 2nd, but it was not announced until July 4th because the signers wanted to make sure that everything was, A-okay before announcing it to NBC News or CNN or whatever. So the American Revolution was a bunch of pretty angry local citizens up and down the East Coast, but mostly in Boston, where I live. And they didn't like the taxes that the king was imposing on them. They were kind of pissed off about it, even though comparatively now those taxes were not that much. But I guess back then, especially since a lot of people didn't have that much money, taxes were bad. And so they became angry enough to form militias. And they needed a leader. So they found George Washington. He actually showed up at the signing of the Declaration in his military uniform and sort of silently, campaigned to have the job of commander of the American forces. However, a few years into the Revolutionary War, George Washington was struggling. He had a bunch of, untrained patriotic farmers on his hands, and they didn't really know how to fight, and they were kind of losing a lot of battles. So what happened was that General von Steuben from what is now Germany, but back then was Prussia, showed up from across the Atlantic, which was a big deal back then because they didn't obviously have airplanes. And he started helping Washington whip his troops into, world-class military shape. And shortly after that, the Marquis de Lafayette of France also showed up to help George Washington because Washington was struggling at the end of the war. And the assistance that was provided by the Marquis of Lafayette to Washington during the last few years of the Revolutionary War clinched the war for the Americans. Otherwise, I don't think this country would exist now as it does. It would have been maybe a different country later, but the Americans would have lost the Revolutionary War had it not been for the Marquis of Lafayette. That's a fact. So I'm silently pondering how the Marquis of Lafayette, was able to make it over from France so quickly. He basically kind of showed up at the last minute and saved the day. And how did he know, where he had to go? I mean, those ships back then didn't have any GPS. They didn't have smartphones, computers. They didn't have walkie-talkies. They couldn't, radio the command center and make sure that they were on course. So what if Lafayette had taken a wrong turn and ended up in Canada? Would Canada have turned into the United States? I mean, would he have helped liberate Canada from the British? Because Canada was British. In the Revolutionary War, Canada was mostly British with, Quebec being under French rule. So what if Lafayette had ended up in Canada? I mean, that would have been a completely different outcome, a different country, a different war, a different situation. So I think I'm going to ponder that question for the next hour or so until I find something else to focus on.